Hi, so just as a quick introduction, my name is Allison Grotz. I'm currently a fourth-year student in book and paper conservation at the University of Amsterdam. And so last year I wrote my master thesis on layer build-ups, flaking, and fragility levels in Friable media drawings. And I looked at Belgian symbolist artist Léon Spilliaert's drawings as a case study. And so here's just a quick outline of my presentation. So I'll be starting with a very brief introduction, so the context of the research, and then I'll go into the research question and the hypothesis. After this, I'll quickly describe like the case study, so Lente by Léon Spilliaert, before going into the methodology, so the mock-ups that I made, that I made to look into the concept of fragility levels and flaking. I'll then discuss the results and just round everything up in a small conclusion. So as an introduction, the conservation issue with Friable media is that there is currently still quite a lack of knowledge when it comes to its behavior and materiality, specifically because of the adhesion issues. And so more recently, the Friable project was set up, and it's going to run between 2022 and 2026, and is an interdisciplinary project run between, among others, the Royal Museum of Fine Arts of Belgium, the Rijksmuseum, KU Leuven, KIK IRPA, and Slav La Cambre in Belgium. And the aim of this project is to, among others, understand Friable media better, as well as to establish guidelines and protocols for these types of objects. But at this point, I would just like to quickly say I won't go into detail about Friable project itself, because tomorrow there will be a talk by Marie-Noël, who will talk more about this specific project. And I would highly recommend you to attend that. But during my master thesis kind of research, I was able to visit the Royal Museum of Fine Arts of Belgium, and I got to see these two paintings that are part of the research project of the Friable project. And well, these paintings stood out because there was quite the severe amount of flaking and cracking, and we didn't really fully understand what it was about. But visual observations kind of showed that this cracking and this flaking was it was worse in areas that had a friable media underneath a paint-like layer. And so based on this, I kind of started asking myself, how does different layering orders, or how does a layer build-up influence the fragility level of drawings containing friable media? And I was specifically looking at friable media in combination with paint, or in this case gouache or oil pastels. And in order to further understand this interaction, I wanted to ask myself, what happens when these layers separate, where and why does it separate, and how does a specific component in the paint contribute to this flaking and fragility? So based on readings and these observations, I set up this hypothesis. So regardless of the organization of layers, I hypothesized that more binder in the paint layer would contribute to more flaking and therefore increase the fragility level of drawings containing friable media. I took this hypothesis from an article by Rossi et al. From 2002. So I read the article and kind of got the idea that a larger amount of binder would cause the gouache, so the paint layer, to dry more more rigidly, and therefore this would then increase the brittleness and the risk of flaking. And this increased brittleness and risk of flaking, in combination with the adherence problems that come with pastels, that these two combined would create a more fragile artwork. So let's have a closer look at Lente by Léon Spilliaert, so one of the case studies. So Léon Spilliaert was a Dutch symbolist artist from the late 19th, early 20th century, and most of his artworks are currently housed in Brussels by the Royal Museum of Fine Arts. And as you can see on this image, there are quite a few areas that have a bit of cracking, flaking, and there's also quite a bit of loss. And as you can see on the two close-ups on the right side, this area seems to be more damaged than the others, and it seems like there is a friable pastel layer underneath this paint-like medium. And so looking at the museum records, I initially assumed it was gouache, because that's also a medium, according to literature and other archival documents. Gouache was a very popular medium, or Lente liked working with it a lot. What was really handy with this artwork is that while it was set up for exhibition one time, a flake came off and it was then collected from the passepartout, and because of this we were allowed to look at it in further detail under a microscope as well as with chemical analysis. So under a microscope, it had a more waxy appearance, and it seemed to be composed of 3 different components. So first of all, there was a more black medium. Number 2 points towards a more blue waxy medium. And as you can see with arrow number 3, there is a very waxy white transparent material in there as well. And as I just said, museum records stated it was possibly gouache. However, this visual appearance kind of is a first indication that this was not the case. Because if you look at a close-up of gouache, this would have a more heterogeneous appearance. Your flakes would have clearer edges, and, well, it would not look as waxy. And so we basically took this to chemical analysis, and it was analyzed with FTIR and GCMS. And we found, among others, paraffin wax and fatty acids, as well as Prussian blue, charcoal, and gypsum. Again, looking at the museum records that stated it was gouache, this kind of is a second indication that this is not a case, because paraffin wax and fatty acids is not incredibly common with gouache. Gouache would have had traces of a polysaccharide binder, which was not the case here. So the visual analysis in combination with the chemical analysis kind of show oh, this is not gouache, but it is rather a wax or an oil-based medium. And so with this information, we were kind of able to have a closer look at the different damaged areas. So as you can see, the more damaged areas on the right had a blue, kind of more pastel-like friable media layer underneath, and the top paint-like layer ended up being, well, oil pastel rather than gouache. But there were still other areas that were damaged, but not to this point. And you can see how the extent of the damage kind of changes depending on how this media was layered. And so with all of this information, I decided to create mock-ups to investigate how different variables would increase or decrease the flaking, and therefore also the overall fragility of an object. So I decided to look into these following layer buildups. So gouache on cardboard, gouache, then an intermediary pastel layer on cardboard. I inversed this, and then I also did the similar layer buildups, but I used oil pastel instead because that's what was found on Lente. I decided for the actual gouache to look at 2 additional variables, so the thickness as well as the quantity of the binder, to look and investigate the original research questions that I had raised. And well, I applied my mock-up, so these different layer buildups and this different media on a cardboard support, because that was also the support that was very similar to what Lente was created on. And so with all of these variables, I know it seems a little complicated with all of these variables and all of these abbreviations, but I ended up making 15 types of mock-ups. That I then, so this is what a mock-up looked like. It was a strip of cardboard with the different layer build-ups. And this strip was then later cut up into 4 pieces, so 4 squares. One was kept as a control sample, and 3 of these extra squares were subjected to artificial aging. Artificial aging was done in climate chambers for 3 weeks at a fluctuating relative humidity between 25% and 75% for an hour each. The temperature was kept constant at 60 degrees Celsius. After that, I mounted these square samples in a Passpar 2 and replicated or simulated like hanging motions to kind of induce flaking and damage. And so now I would just like quickly like to introduce the results by looking at the groups of the layer buildups. So if we look at the mock-ups that only had a gouache layer, but I played around with like different thicknesses or different amounts of binder in the gouache layer, I didn't really find differences when it comes to flaking. So like the main type of damage that occurred was cracking. And as you see also, as for example, on these 2 types of photos, with the thin gouache layer with the small amount of binder, but the thick gouache layer and the small amount of binder, so different thickness, but same amount of binder, nothing really changed other than like the visual appearance in a way. It was hard to look into like internal stresses because, well, during my thesis, time ran out and we didn't have the possibility to look further into this anymore. But well, long story short, it seemed like it would mainly change visually, and during handling, no flakes came off. So at this point, we can say, yeah, changing the amount of binder or the thickness didn't really contribute to like additional fragility. When we look at the next type of mock-up, so when there is a dry pastel layer introduced in the middle, there like a different type of damage occurred. So there was more delamination, flaking, or paint loss, and powdering of the pastel wasn't as prominent during the handling mock-ups. If we compare the mock-ups looking at the different amounts of binder or the thicknesses, they didn't really flake more or less. It's really just the type of damage that changed. And looking at another type of mock-up, so the top layer was a dry pastel layer, and then the intermediary layer was a gouache layer. The main type of damage was powdering, and in this case there was less flaking and less delamination, but powdering of pastel was really the prominent issue here. Except, because we do love a good exception. So if we look at this mock-up, you can see it. There's considerably more flaking compared to its like counterparts. So if I would have looked at like 3AX, 3BX, 3BZ, like these mock-ups, they all flaked and cracked in the same way, except the 3AZ that had a thick layer of gouache and a large amount of binder. In all honesty, I do not fully understand what caused this to change compared to its like dry pastel and gouache counterparts. But I kind of have the theory that because it was a thick gouache layer and a large amount of binder, there were like uneven drying rates, and with the application of the dry pastel on top, that was a bit rougher maybe. It just caused the whole thing to kind of crack more than the others. But basically, I hope this was clear because I know it's a lot of information. Like I didn't fully see a correlation between the amount of binder and the thickness of the gouache and how that contributed. So in the sense like increase or decrease to flaking or fragility. But where it started becoming interesting is when I compared mock-ups with different layer build-ups, but the same amount of binder or the same thickness of the gouache layer. So if you look on the left side, those were that's an example of a mock-up with an intermediary dry pastel layer. And so you can see there are larger flakes. It seems like there's a tiny bit more powdering. And if you compare that to the mock-ups on the right, it's mainly so the flakes are considerably smaller. It's more a pastel powdering issue. And so I kind of observed all of my mock-ups throughout the experiments and compared the size of the flakes and the amount of the fallout, the losses, and I found that mock-ups with the layer buildup on the right had more issues and seemed more fragile during the experiments. And so these observations helped me to establish what I would call a fragility level hierarchy. So if we still take into account this one exception that acted a bit differently, that would be the first one. But in general, we could see, or I could see that mock-ups with a intermediary pastel friable layer were more fragile and more prone to flaking than the other reverse layer order. And so just as a quick conclusion, this research kind of helped to properly identify the media as oil or a wax-based oil or a wax-based medium like an oil pastel. And it was also helpful to see that how they acted differently, and this helped establish there is in fact different fragility level, and that the layering is a contributing factor to the fragility. And so as just a general application, we can say that multi-layered artworks such as Lente, so the case study, with an underlaying friable media layer is more prone to flaking and to damage, and therefore requires more caution. And so as a result, you have to consider if you want to either limit handling to avoid new damages or aggravate the pre-existing damages, or if you want to perform treatment instead in perhaps a form of consolidation. And at this point, I would just like to say thank you to my professors at the University of Amsterdam and the RCE, as well as everyone involved with the Friable project. And I would like to say thank you to IATA for organizing this conference this week.
You can stay.
Okay.
Thanks, Allison. Do we have any questions? Yes, we do. I see here in the front.
Hi, thank you for your talk. My name is Christa Hoffmann from Vienna. And my question is if you or one of your followers will use the mock-ups for tests of consolidation.
Yes. Oh. Hi? Oh, okay. Yeah, that was actually briefly discussed during a meeting with the Royal Museum of Fine Arts. I still have the mock-ups that I made during my thesis. And as far as I know, they definitely can be used for preliminary testing or for some experiments. And I think that, yeah, that would be a good idea, because it took 3 weeks to age them. So at least they can be used further. But I don't think anything specific has been planned as of right now.
Frank Maury. Curious, in your painting, you showed that predominantly you were focusing on the two small figures in the lower right corner.
Yeah.
But the rest of the painting seemed to be relatively in good condition. Were you able to, in looking at the piece, try to understand what the artist was trying to do that caused those few areas to flake, whereas the rest of it seemed to be held together? it was just kind of unusual that in just those couple of areas that you had that kind of technique where he was applying different layers, and that seemed to fail. And you also keep mentioning it was done on cardboard.
Yeah.
Or what was it, a rigid cardboard, or was it a thick paper, a pastel type paper?
It was so to answer your cardboard question, well, I would like to preface this by saying I wasn't able to look at the painting unframed. So I looked at it while it was up on display in its frame, and that kind of limited what I was able to see. But it seemed like the cardboard he used was a more like textured cardboard rather than like thicker paper cardboard, if that makes sense. And your second question related more to like his technique, right? He was a very like in a way experimental artist. He was also self-taught. He didn't have a extensive education in like, art and painting. And if you also look at his other types of artworks, he liked using different kinds of medias in different kinds of like layerings. So I'm not too sure what his intention was behind this specific texture and this specific technique in this area. Would that answer your question? Okay.
Gibt es noch weitere Fragen?
Hello, Karin Steiner, MUMOC, Vienna. Thank you for those beautiful pictures of damages. I'm curious if I'm responsible for Friable media work, maybe a pastel underdrawing and a gouache above, and I'm not able to do some consolidation, but I have to say, I have to send it to a loan, for example. Are there any parameters or climate window you can suggest? Because to explain my questions, you made your tests with a strong fluctuating humidity, of course. I understand you want to see those results, but I'm wondering if you thought which minimal fluctuations are there, or do I need to cause the damage on your side, testing them? Or on the other hand, finding out how is it possible to protect friable media only by controlling climate?
Okay, thank you for your question. I'd be more wait, how should I answer this question? Okay. We also noticed like very similar damages on other of his artworks that were housed at different institutions and also have a different provenance background. So I would think that the damage is caused by high fluctuations. So in this case, I would be more inclined to say store your artworks at like just make sure that to keep the fluctuations to a minimum. So the normal standard. Like let's say 50 plus minus relative humidity and 20 plus minus 5 for degrees Celsius in temperature. Because it seemed like the cracking was really created by the fluctuations and the material's inability to adapt in time.
So do you think it's only a matter of time, or?
Do you mean the...
No, I'm just wondering if it's possible to prevent those cracks to appear if I only stay in a whatever the safe area is? Or do you say those friable building up layers, it will appear, the damage will occur, and there is only the solution of doing some intervention and fixing them? Or is there also the possibility to be very careful in, I don't know, very strong control of the climate?
Could we?
Maybe we can
Laila
discuss
has
it
an answer.
afterwards directly.
Yeah. Laila has an answer. She's one of my co-authors / professors. She might know. She might be a bit more experienced with this type of material.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm here with the Friable group. So that's actually a question we are looking into. So we're going to get the mock-ups that Allison did to continue and looking into that because we're not clear about that. And hopefully in a couple of years we'll be back with some answers. But if anyone has suggestions, we are now preparing the mock-ups. So any insight is good.
Thank you.
I did have a question for her, sorry. I just wanted to be nice and wait. I'm sorry, maybe this is a silly question. I really don't know. What is GCMS?
So that was a gas. Can someone help me with the abbreviations?
There's a microphone somewhere. Gas
Spectral. No.
Chromatography mass spectroscopy.
Thank you.
I should.
And my other question was for you. So in your samples in the picture, they were on the right-hand side. There were these dips in the flakes. Did you explain what that was, or
That was. Can we go back?
can we go back? If we can't figure it out later. That's okay. I was just wondering because they were very prominent.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, what that was.
That was, I would assume, just mainly. I'm trying to think exactly what you're referring to. But I think that was just the way the flake detached from its mock-up. So the way the breaks occurred within that layer.
I come back to you if we can't get there.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.